The world woke up today to a reality that Moscow's propaganda machine spent decades trying to render impossible. For months, the Belgorod region was whispered to be the steel suture of the Russian Federation, a sovereign fortress, an impenetrable logistical artery, and the ultimate red line of Vladimir Putin. But in a blistering 24-hour window, that red line wasn't just crossed, it was incinerated. We are witnessing more than a tactical retreat. We are documenting a systemic, cascading institutional failure. As of 4 a.m. local time, the impenetrable defense lines of the Russian 6th Combined Arms Army have dissolved. What was supposed to be a slow war of attrition has transformed into a masterclass in maneuver warfare, leaving the Kremlin paralyzed and the world in awe of Ukraine's tactical evolution. Let's look at the cold, hard data filtering through the fog of war. The clock began ticking at 3:15 yesterday. While Russian commanders were bogged down in bureaucratic reporting, Ukrainian storm battalions, supported by a precision-guided intelligence umbrella, bypassed the primary trench systems. The result? A total tactical meltdown. In less than one solar cycle, 6,000 Russian service members did not just retreat, they laid down their arms. This is not a regrouping. When 6,000 men choose the certainty of a Ukrainian POW camp over the glory of a Russian foxhole, it signals a terminal hemorrhage of morale. The geographic collapse is even more staggering. From the Shebekino district to the outskirts of the regional capital, Russian units abandoned positions that were fortified with billions of rubles. Eyewitness reports and geolocated footage describe a scene of pure, unadulterated panic. Officers fleeing in civilian vehicles, leaving their conscripts to face the silent, lethal humming of Ukrainian FPV drones. Now, let's talk about the numbers that will keep the Russian general staff awake for the next decade. If you want to understand the scale of this disaster, look at the logistical graveyards left behind. Our investigative team has confirmed the capture of 7 major ammunition depots. We aren't talking about small arms crates. We are talking about 16,000 tons of high-grade munitions. To put that in perspective for our American viewers, that is enough kinetic energy to level a mid-sized city, now turned against its original owners. This includes thousands of 152mm artillery shells, dozens of Iskander-M ballistic missiles, thermobaric warheads intended for civilian terror, now in the hands of the Ukrainian ZSU. But the humiliation doesn't stop at the silos. The sheer volume of hardware donated to the Ukrainian cause in this single operation is unprecedented in modern history. Ukraine's tractor brigades have been replaced by specialized recovery teams, securing 714 main battle tanks, including the supposedly unbeatable T-90M Prorov and 326 armored personnel carriers. This is not just a loss of equipment. It is a forced disarmament of an entire military district. Putin's invincible army has become the primary equipment supplier for the very nation it sought to erase. To the casual observer, Belgorod is a border province. To a military analyst, it is the spine of the entire Eastern Front. By shattering the Russian hold here, Ukraine hasn't just gained ground, they have severed the central nervous system of Russian logistics. Every shell, every liter of fuel, and every loaf of bread that was supposed to reach the Donbass front passed through this region. By turning Belgorod into a zone of chaos, Ukraine has effectively starved the Russian offensive hundreds of miles away. Furthermore, the psychological impact is a force multiplier. For the Russian public, the war was a distant television show. Today, it is a reality on their doorstep. The myth of the great Russian defender died in a ditch in Belgorod, smothered by the incompetence of a leadership that values loyalty over capability. Compare the two sides. On one hand, you have the Russian military, a rigid, top-down, corruption-riddled behemoth where soldiers are treated as disposable meat. Their equipment, while numerous, is maintained with the care of a junkyard. Their spirit is broken by the realization that they are fighting for the ego of a man in a bunker, not the survival of their country. On the other hand, we see the brilliance of the Zelenskyy administration. This is a leadership that has mastered the digital battlefield. They aren't just fighting with tanks, They are fighting with real-time satellite data, decentralized command structures, and a burning, righteous conviction. President Zelenskyy has transformed from a wartime leader into a global icon of the indomitable spirit. His strategy of active defense, luring the enemy into a false sense of security before striking at the weakest logistical link, is now being studied by every NATO war college. As the smoke clears over the burning husks of 700 Russian tanks, the strategic calculus of this war has shifted permanently. The Belgorod fortress was the psychological shield of the Russian Federation. That shield is now in pieces. What we are witnessing is the shatter point, the moment when a military force transitions from a controlled retreat into a terminal collapse. Vladimir Putin sought to rebuild an empire instead. He has presided over the greatest military humiliation in Russian history since the 1905 Russo-Japanese War. History is written by the victors, but it is forged by the brave. As Ukraine secures these 16,000 tons of ammunition, they aren't just preparing for the next battle. They are preparing the final chapter of this conflict. But the question remains, beyond the explosions and the captured tanks, what is the invisible hand guiding this collapse? How did Ukrainian intelligence infiltrate the deepest layers of the Russian command? To understand the fall of Belgorod, we must look past the battlefield and into the shadow war being fought in the digital ether. While the kinetic destruction of the Russian front captured the world's headlines, there is a deeper, more terminal wound festering within the Kremlin that the cameras often miss: the total collapse of strategic sight. At Belgorod, we witness the absolute obsolescence of Soviet-era military doctrine when forced to collide with 21st-century network-centric warfare. Ukraine did not merely strike with artillery, they struck with algorithms. Utilizing a seamless integration of real-time data, AI-driven target prioritization, and Western satellite constellations that turned the battlefield into a glass house. While Russian commanders were bogged down in archaic bureaucracy, waiting for handwritten orders to trickle down from remote bunkers in Moscow, Ukrainian strike cells were operating with surgical autonomy, proving that this was never a fair fight, but rather a collision between digital intelligence and industrial-age inertia. Every Russian command post, every fuel truck, and every concealed battery was indexed, tracked, and neutralized before the red line was even breached, a reality that brings us to the figure rising above the smoke, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. To the global community, Zelenskyy has become the absolute antithesis of the bunker dictator, standing as the architect of light and the embodiment of indomitable will. He has redefined the role of a modern commander-in-chief, ruling not through fear or internal purges, but through transparency and a strategic vision that has transformed Ukraine into the world's most advanced defense tech laboratory. Every kilometer gained in Belgorod bears the hallmark of this decisive governance, where young, tech-savvy generals are empowered to embrace high-risk maneuvers while standing shoulder to shoulder with the infantry. Under his stewardship, Ukraine has proven the fundamental truth that a nation fueled by the desire for liberty will always dismantle an empire built on the hollow foundations of lies, a fact that unmasks the systemic putrefaction now paralyzing Moscow. The Belgorod disaster has stripped away the final veil of Putin's military prestige, revealing a Potemkin army where 6,000 soldiers surrendered in a single day because they finally realized they were fighting for a kleptocracy. When a Russian conscript looks at his superior, he sees a middle manager of corruption who was the first to flee in a civilian vehicle when the Ukrainian units neared, leaving the men to the meat grinder while maintenance funds for those 714 captured tanks were diverted to luxury villas on the Black Sea. Vladimir Putin remains a prisoner of his own echo chamber, a shadow tyrant sitting at absurdly long tables believing his own propaganda, while his power evaporates like frost under the heat of Ukrainian precision. This rot was exploited perfectly by the Ukrainian drone blanket, which executed a strategic decapitation of the Russian central nervous system by targeting electronic warfare suites and fuel convoys rather than wasting resources on random shelling. Once the Russian units were blinded and their fuel ran dry, those massive tanks became nothing more than steel coffins, establishing a new paradox of war. The agile and small will inevitably devour the massive and stagnant. The victory at Belgorod is thus not merely a geographic gain, but a psychological shattering that has destroyed the myth of Russia's infinite reserves and proven that when the spirit of an army breaks, the quality of its hardware becomes irrelevant. The strategic scales have tipped decisively in favor of Kiev, reclaiming not just territory, but the future of Europe itself. The fall of the Belgorod fortress serves as the ultimate proof that the light of truth and the power of innovation will always pierce through the darkness of imperial delusion. Yet, this is only the beginning of a seismic shift vibrating through the halls of power from Washington to Beijing. As the last Russian tanks are hauled away, we must now look toward the global fallout and the start of a cascading collapse for the old world order. The smoke rising from the Belgorod ammunition depots does more than just cloud the Russian horizon. It signals the definitive end of the post-Cold War era and the shattering of the myth of Russian invincibility. As the 16,000 tons of abandoned munitions are inventoried by Ukrainian forces, a seismic shockwave is traveling through the financial corridors of Moscow and the diplomatic halls of the world's great powers. This is no longer a localized border skirmish, it is a terminal crisis for the Kremlin's authority, forcing a radical recalculation from Washington to Beijing. The international community is witnessing the shatter point of a regime that banked its entire existence on the illusion of brute force, only to find that in the face of Ukrainian resolve and Western technology, that force has become a liability. Every captured T-90M tank and every surrendering Russian battalion serves as a visceral data point for global markets and military strategists, proving that the Russian Federation is no longer a peer competitor, but a hollowed-out shell struggling to maintain the borders of its own heartland. This military bankruptcy is triggering an unprecedented economic hemorrhaging that no amount of shadow banking can conceal. The collapse in Belgorod has exposed the fatal flaw in Putin's war economy, the inability to replace high-tech losses while the ruble undergoes a slow-motion disintegration. For the American investor and the global economist, the message is clear: the Russian fortress economy has been breached as surely as its physical trenches. The sheer scale of equipment loss in 24 hours represents billions of dollars in sunk costs that cannot be recovered, leading to an agonizing budgetary crisis for a dictator who must now choose between funding a failing war or preventing a domestic uprising. Meanwhile, the Zelenskyy administration continues to radiate a moral and strategic clarity that has solidified the Western alliance. The triumph at Belgorod has silenced the skeptics in NATO, proving that the investment in Ukrainian freedom yields a return that transcends territory. It yields the preservation of the rules-based international order. On the world stage, the shadow tyrant has never been more isolated, as his primary strategic partners now watch the disintegration of Russian power with a mixture of predatory interest and calculated distance. The fall of Belgorod has effectively demoted Russia from a global superpower to a regional cautionary tale, a transition that will redefine energy security and maritime trade for the next 50 years. The brilliance of Ukraine's defense has created a new blueprint for sovereignty in the 21st century. A lean, high-tech, and transparent democracy can and will defeat a bloated, corrupt autocracy. As the Ukrainian flag is raised over recovered positions, it is not just a piece of cloth fluttering in the wind, it is a beacon of light piercing through the darkness of imperial delusion, signaling a future where the sanctity of borders is enforced by the precision of truth. The strategic scales have not just tipped, they have been permanently recalibrated. We are moving toward a conclusion where the Belgorod disaster will be taught in history books as the moment the Russian Empire finally ran out of time, luck, and lies. The psychological impact of 6,000 men surrendering within their own sovereign territory is a wound that never heals. It is a stain on the Kremlin's legacy that will haunt the Russian psyche for generations. As we look toward the final resolution of this conflict, it is clear that the path to peace is being paved by Ukrainian bravery and fueled by the very ammunition the invaders left behind in their panic. The era of the Bao Chua is ending, and in its place, a new, resilient Europe is being born, one forged in the fires of Belgorod and led by the indomitable spirit of a people who refuse to be erased. As the dust settles over the Belgorod region, one truth remains undeniable: we are no longer watching a mere border skirmish, but the unfolding of a new chapter in global history, one where courage and high-tech intelligence dismantle the illusions of the past. The strategic shift we've analyzed today suggests that the era of imperial overreach is hitting a terminal wall, paving the way for a future defined by sovereignty and innovation. We will continue to monitor every heartbeat of this conflict, from the muddy trenches to the high-stakes corridors of global power, to bring you the deep-dive analysis you won't find in the mainstream headlines. If you value these rigorous, multi-dimensional perspectives on the forces shaping our world, please support our work by hitting the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon. Your engagement is what allows us to produce high-caliber investigative content like this. We want to hear from you. Is the collapse in Belgorod the definitive beginning of the end for the Kremlin's ambitions? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We look forward to a sharp and thoughtful discussion with you. We thank you for watching. All information provided in this report is intended to reflect objective reality and is not intended to attack any individual or organization. Thank you for your time and your trust. We will see you in the next deep dive analysis. Until then, stay informed and stay vigilant.